The wind screamed across the high ridge like something alive and angry, clawing at the trees and tearing at the rocks. At nearly 9,000 feet, the air cut into the lungs with every breath, sharp and thin. Even in late spring, snow still hid in the shadows of the tall pines, clinging stubbornly to the mountain. Silas Blackwood stood knee-deep in the freezing rush of Painted Creek, his hands numb as he lifted a heavy beaver trap from the water. The cold bit like teeth, but he did not react. He had learned long ago that pain only mattered if you let it. Silas was 40 years old, though years of war and mountain weather had carved his face into something much older. A white scar ran from his temple down into his beard, a memory from a battlefield he rarely allowed himself to remember. He was broad-shouldered and solid, built for work and survival, not comfort. He hauled the trap onto the bank and turned toward his cabin, a low, rough structure clinging to the mountainside like it had grown there. It was not a home, it was shelter, protection against a world that showed no mercy. His days followed a hard rhythm: chop wood, check traps, skin game, eat alone. Nights were worse. When the wind shook the shutters and the fire burned low, memories crept in. The war. His younger brother dying in his arms. A woman back east who had told him she would not follow him into the wilderness. Silas had learned his lesson from that. Love made men weak. Love distracted them. Out here, distraction killed. But the winters were getting harder. His joints ached. The work took longer. He knew the truth even if he hated it. If he broke a leg or fell sick, no one would come. He would die alone in the snow. It was not fear that drove him. It was reason. He needed help. Not romance, not tenderness, another set of hands. That was why he opened the small wooden chest at the foot of his bed and took out the letters. Women from the East, sent by a marriage agency in St. Louis. Many spoke of love and faith and adventure. Silas set those aside. Then he found the last letter. The writing was firm, almost harsh. Her name was Ara Vance. She wrote that she was 28, that she could cook and sew, that she was not afraid of work. She asked for no love, only safety, respect, a roof that did not leak. It was not a love letter. It was an agreement. Silas read it twice, then once more. He counted out the money. He wrote back a single page, short, honest, hard living. No promises. Come if you accept. 2,000 miles away, Ara sat on a bench in a crowded train station, clutching Silas's letter like it might disappear. Coal smoke filled the air. People pushed past her without looking. Her reflection in the dark glass showed a thin, tired woman with shadows under her eyes. She had once been proud, once respected. That life was gone. She boarded the train, then the stagecoach, carrying everything she owned in a small bag. She did not look back. The city had taken her name and turned it into a stain. The West was not a dream. It was an escape. The journey was brutal. Days of dust and wind. Nights of fear. People whispered when they learned she was a mail-order bride. They judged her without knowing her. Ara learned to stare out the window and stay silent. Words hurt, but hunger hurt more. 3 days from her destination, disaster struck. Rain turned the road to mud. The stagecoach tipped in a rushing creek. Wood cracked. People screamed. One of the drivers lay bleeding badly. Ara did not freeze. She tore cloth, bound the wound, and stayed with him through the night as snow fell around them. When help finally came, people looked at her differently. Not kindly, but with confusion. She did not care. She only wanted the journey to end. Silas rode into Pine Hollow to meet the stage, ignoring the stares and the whispers. The town never liked him. They called him a hermit, a savage. He waited for 2 long days. When the battered coach finally arrived, he felt something tighten in his chest. Ara stepped down slowly. She was smaller than he expected. Thin. Pale. Holding her bag like armor. Their eyes met. Silas saw fear there, but also stubborn strength. Ara saw a man who looked dangerous, scarred and silent, but whose eyes held a deep, lonely stillness. "You Ara?" Silas asked. "I am," she said. "Are you Mr. Blackwood?" "Sill," he said. He offered his hand, awkward and unsure. She hesitated, then placed her cold fingers in his rough palm. The touch was brief, but something shifted for them both. They rode out of town together as the sky darkened, climbing into the mountains. The trail narrowed. The air grew colder. Ara's hands shook on the saddle horn. When they stopped to camp for the night, the wind cut through her thin coat. Silas watched her shiver. Without a word, he gave her his only blanket and took the cold himself. That night, as the fire crackled and the forest breathed around them, Ara lay wrapped in his warmth while Silas kept watch. She slept, truly slept, for the first time in years. And Silas stared into the flames, unaware that the careful distance he had built around his heart was already beginning to crack. Morning came thin and cold, the sun barely touching the peaks as Silas led the horses higher into the mountains. Ara followed stiffly, her legs sore and her hands aching from gripping the saddle. When they reached the ridge, the cabin appeared, low and rough against the stone. It looked lonely and unforgiving. Ara felt her chest tighten. This was to be her life now. Inside, the cabin was one room, a narrow bed, a rough table. Shelves lined with traps and tools. The smell of smoke and cured hides hung heavy in the air. Silas moved with quiet efficiency, setting down supplies, stirring the fire. He did not look at her much. "You take the bed," he said finally. "I'll sleep on the floor." Ara hesitated, then nodded. She was too tired to argue. That night, they slept apart, strangers bound by law but divided by fear. The days that followed were hard. The mountain did not care that Ara had grown up in cities. The thin air left her dizzy. Her hands blistered from hauling water and chopping kindling. Bread burned, fingers numbed. Still, she did not complain. She would not be a burden. Silas watched quietly. He corrected her when needed, showed her how to build the fire, how to read the weather, how to listen. He never raised his voice. He never touched her without reason. Slowly, her fear dulled. One afternoon, Silas stepped in behind her as she struggled with an axe. He guided her hands, his chest solid at her back. The closeness stole her breath. The wood split cleanly. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Silas stepped away fast, shaken. That night, a sudden storm tore down the mountain. Snow slammed against the cabin. The cold crept in through every crack. Ara shivered uncontrollably. Silas looked at the floor where he slept and then at the narrow bed. "We need warmth," he said. "Just sleep, nothing else." Fear rose in Ara's chest, but the cold was worse. They lay back to back, stiff and silent. When a violent gust shook the shutters, Ara gasped. Without thinking, Silas reached back and covered her hand with his. He did not pull her close. He only held on. In the morning, they pulled apart quickly, embarrassed and quiet. But something had changed. The distance between them felt thinner. They rode into Pine Hollow for supplies a week later. The town watched them closely. Whispers followed. In the general store, a man spoke cruelly about Ara. Silas did not shout. He leaned across the counter and warned the man softly. The room went silent. Ara stood frozen, stunned. No one had ever defended her before. Outside, she thanked him. Silas shrugged it off, but his hands shook. Life settled into a rhythm. They worked side by side. Fences were mended. Wood stacked. Traps checked. The mountain tested them constantly. One day, a black bear wandered too close. Silas drove it off with a rifle shot, then scolded Ara harshly for not carrying her weapon. But his anger cracked, revealing fear. She touched his face, calming him. He almost kissed her, almost. The nights grew longer. One night, Silas woke screaming from a nightmare. Ara grabbed him, grounding him in the present. He clung to her, shaking, whispering about his brother who died in the war. She held him until the storm inside him passed. They slept facing each other. After that, their bodies close but careful. Summer came fast. Wildflowers filled the meadows. Ara grew stronger. She learned to shoot. One afternoon, she brought down a hare cleanly. Silas smiled openly for the first time. Pride shone in his eyes. Trust deepened. Desire followed. It lingered in glances, in brushing hands, in shared silence. But neither crossed the line. Fear still ruled them. Then the past came riding up the mountain. A deputy arrived with news. A man back east claimed Era was a criminal. A reward had been offered. The town turned cold again. Stores refused credit. The church sermon cut deep with judgment. Era finally told Silas everything. About her former employer, about the lies, about running to survive. She expected disgust. Instead, Silas knelt before her and called her brave. The word broke her. She wept in his arms. They kissed that night, slowly and carefully, stopping before fear could twist it into something wrong. They agreed to wait, to build something real. But danger was already climbing the mountain. A hired man from the east arrived in Pine Hollow, spreading lies and money. The snow began to fall early and heavy. One day, Silas went out to check traps and did not return. Ara waited. Panic grew. Then she went after him. She found him broken at the base of a ravine, freezing and barely alive. She dragged him back through the storm, inch by inch, refusing to stop. In the cabin, she stripped his frozen clothes and pressed her own warmth against his body, saving his life with sheer will. Silas survived. When he woke, he knew the truth. This was no bargain anymore. This was love. And the world was about to test it harder than ever before. Silas healed slowly. His leg remained weak, but he lived, and he lived because Ara had refused to leave him behind. The truth settled into both of them without words. What they shared was no longer an agreement or a duty. It was chosen. When the snow finally softened enough to travel, Silas insisted on riding down to town. Ara was afraid. Pine Hollow had never forgiven easily. Still, she went with him, her hand resting on his arm, steadying him as much as he steadied her. They went straight to the church. The minister was surprised when Silas spoke. "We signed papers once," he said. "That was law. I want God to see this one." The church was nearly empty, but the words mattered. Silas spoke his vows like promises carved in stone. Ara answered with quiet strength. When he slid a worn gold ring onto her finger, something old and heavy lifted from her chest. She was no longer running. She was standing. Not everyone approved. Some whispered, some turned away, but others watched in silence, unsure what to do with a story that refused to fit their judgment. Then the hired man came. He rode into town smooth and smiling, carrying lies wrapped in fine words. He claimed Ara was a thief, a woman who destroyed men. He waved papers. He waved money. The town stirred with old prejudice and fear of Eastern power. Ara's past stood in the open street again, ugly and loud. The sheriff brought them in for a hearing. The jail cell was cold and small. Ara shook, memories pressing in from all sides. Silas held her, his voice steady. "They won't take you," he said, "not while I breathe." In the hearing hall, witnesses lied easily. A drifter, a bitter miner. Each word painted Ara as something broken and dangerous. The judge listened with tired eyes. When Ara spoke, her voice trembled, but it did not break. She told the truth. Simple, clear. She said she fought a man who tried to own her. She said she ran to survive. The room shifted, uncomfortable with honesty. Silas stood then. He did not argue law. He spoke of winter, of survival, of a woman who pulled him from death when no one else could. He spoke of courage, of love earned, not bought. The room went silent. Then Mrs. Gable stood. The woman who had once judged Ara spoke now in her defense, telling of the stagecoach crash, of blood and mud, of a woman who saved a life without asking for thanks. The hired man lost his smile. Anger cracked through him. He reached for Ara in desperation. Silas moved faster than thought, stepping between them. A gunshot shattered the air. Glass broke. Chaos exploded. When the smoke cleared, the hired man was in irons. The sheriff's voice was firm. The judge's gavel fell. The warrant was dismissed. Ara was free. Outside, the air felt new, clean. Ara leaned into Silas and cried, not from fear, but from release. The war was over. They rode back up the mountain together, slower this time, savoring the climb. The cabin waited, solid and familiar. Home. Seasons turned. The cabin softened. Curtains hung in the window. Laughter replaced silence. When Ara realized she was carrying a child, fear came first, then wonder. Silas held her and promised the mountain would raise them strong. Winter returned, but it did not break them. When the labor came, it came hard and fierce, but Silas stayed at her side through every breath and cry. At dawn, a baby boy was born, small and angry and perfect. They named him Thomas. Silas wept openly, holding his son, the ghosts of his past finally laid to rest. Ara watched them, knowing she had not just survived the world, she had built something better. Years later, people in Pine Hollow spoke of the mountain man and his wife with respect, not because they feared him, but because they understood what it meant to stand when it was easier to look away. High on the ridge, the cabin stood against the sky. Smoke rose from the chimney. A woman, a man, and a child watched the sun climb over the peaks. Love had not made Silas weak. It had made him unbreakable.